There are two sides to every story, and that is perhaps no more relevant than when looking back at the Manchester United career of Pat McGibbon. For some people, he might be the perfect answer to the pub quiz question, which defender spent 5 years at the club and was sent off on his only appearance? True, McGibbon was sent off as United lost 3-0 at home to lowly York City in what was arguably their worst cup humiliation ever. Yet his tale goes far beyond that infamous night at Old Trafford. He still fondly remembers his time at the club, and it has helped shape him into the man he is today as he looks to break the stigma around male mental health. It is a sentiment shared by Sir Alex Ferguson and Roy Keane, both of whom have assisted the former defender in his important mental health work with Train to be Smart, a charity set up in honour of his late brother Philip. I was a Liverpool supporter growing up. All my friends were at the time. It's amazing because sometimes people will ask that question, and it will be like, all right, so you're not really a United supporter. But the truth of the matter is I went over as a kid with my brother, who obviously is part of the story as well. My mum and dad brought us over to Manchester to watch Manchester United against Liverpool at Old Trafford, and I always remember that game, when Gary Walsh made his debut, and had ended up being a teammate of mine. It was just being at Old Trafford. It just made me want more people to be a professional footballer. It's like eating a rump steak and then having sirloin. I was certainly a convert. McGibbon admits he was a late developer given his slight demeanour for a defender, but after a growth spurt he grew in confidence and his performances on the pitch improved too. He had initially been offered a trial at Port Vale, but when that fell through he was back in the Portadown youth team when he caught the eye of United scout Eddie Coulter, who was keen to get him over for a trial. It certainly came out of the blue. I always said it wouldn't matter if it was Accrington Stanley or Manchester United at the time, I just wanted to make a career for myself within professional football. You can imagine it's going from a big fish in a small pool, to one in a huge pool because I thought I was going over for a youth team game, and then they put me straight in the reserve team match against Aston Villa. I was up against Dalian Atkinson and Dwight Yorke. So it really was a baptism of fire. But I must have done well enough to be invited back for another trial that summer. McGibbon doesn't remember much of his trial period at United, but he had a number of teammates who did. It was only when discussing the match later that night that he realized he had done enough to impress those who made the important decisions at the club. I remember being really nervous before. I don't remember an awful lot about it, but I felt as if I did well enough, but I always remember coming back to the digs. I was staying with Robbie Savage and Keith Gillespie at the time, and they had said, "You did really well, like you did really well." I suppose it must have been okay. McGibbon was handed a contract that summer and moved over shortly afterwards. It is a tough time for any young person to leave home and live independently, but for McGibbon it would be even harder. During those formative few months in Manchester, he came back to his digs one day to a distressed landlady, Brenda Gosling, who had just received a call to tell Pat his brother and best friend Philip had taken his own life. In April 1993, 8 months after going to Manchester United, my brother took his own life. It was an extremely difficult time. At the time I had to come back for the wake, the funeral, and to spend time with my family, but in all honesty, I didn't spend too much time back at home because I was trying to make a career for myself. I needed stability, and my stability was football and being with the teammates I had around me. That first year was very, very difficult. It is difficult enough trying to settle in because of homesickness, but to have a family death, not only your brother, but your best friend, pass away was very difficult. At that stage it was quite personal. The gaffer was great in terms of saying take as much time as I needed. But I thought it was better to actually have something to focus on and then go back to the football and within something that I wanted to make as a career. It was hard from that side of things, but the gaffer definitely was really good. Education surrounding mental health related issues has moved on now. So even, the whole science around it. We did have a chaplain, and I was able to speak to him a couple of times, but I always knew that it was there for me to go and then speak to them as and when. I never ever spoke about Philip, I suppose, until 2013, which is basically 20 years after his death, especially publicly, not because I or the were family are embarrassed or anything, it just wasn't spoken about during those times. It was more personal. McGibbon channeled the grief by applying himself to his craft, determined to make the most of the opportunity he had. He used his free time to drop down and train with Eric Harrison's famed youth team and many members of the class of '92, craving any chance he had to focus on football and the welcome distraction it gave him. I had a real affinity with Eric, just even in terms of his culture. He was old school but was very honest in what he did, but also, it occupied my time in the afternoons as well. So rather than getting caught up in the negatives, the coping mechanism was spent favorably. In the 5 years that McGibbon spent at United, his fourth is probably the best known. He was named in the squad that travelled to face Rotor Volgograd in the UEFA Cup and a week later had make his maiden appearance against York in the League Cup. The season before, I'd been involved against Coventry, so I had been on the bench at that stage. I was involved in the squad there and then, but the following year things started to pick up. It was only really that week of the Volgograd game that I was brought in, but even for the York game, I didn't know that I was playing that game, until basically just before. It was a big surprise. Both matches would prove to be huge learning curves for the young defender, and while he learned plenty on the pitch in the second match, his trip to Russia was just as memorable. It was quite surreal, and again just even being part of the first team squad and going over the Volgograd. Just seeing different places, but even the experience over there, you could tell how, not backward, but certainly, how different it was to us in Manchester. I think that the beds were about 5'4" and I was 6'3". I can only imagine what Pally was like or Big Peter Schmeichel, because the beds were tiny. Just being in and around it, and part of it was absolutely amazing for somebody that only ever dreamed of these things. If being on the bench for a European tie was one dream, then a week later he'd go a step further, making his full debut for the club in their infamous 3-0 home defeat to York City. McGibbon was thrown in at the deep end, partnering Gary Pallister as part of a makeshift defence. Things started badly when United fell a goal down early on, but they got worse when the young Northern Irishman conceded a penalty and was shown a straight red for his last-ditch foul on Paul Barnes as he tried to prevent a second goal. 28 years on, he has no complaints about the red card, but McGibbon still has the cutting from the paper that proves his foul actually took place outside the box and should only have been a free kick instead. I look back at what happened in terms of my sending off and the penalty, and within that just myself and Pally, we hadn't really played as a partnership before. Trying to play offside and then at that stage chasing back and you're making split-second decisions. I decided to take down the player outside the box to give away a free kick as opposed to a penalty. So that side of things, I obviously remember then after the sending off. I knew I would get sent off because it wasn't so much a tackle as a rugby tackle. I sometimes think about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in the Liverpool game when he was the last man and did the same sort of thing to try and take one for the team basically. That's what I was thinking of at that moment. Obviously when we got in the gaffer give us a bit of a rollicking, not just me but everybody, but then the following morning we went in and he called me up straight away. He said, "Look, this is part and parcel of football," and said it's how you react. So he was really good. McGibbon is now firmly in the habit of referring to Ferguson as gaffer as second nature, something he learned about the hard way in one of his first meetings with the legendary manager at the Cliff. In the foyer there were steps up to the canteen, and I was walking up those steps when the gaffer was coming down with two parents and an apprentice. As I was walking up he said to me, "All right, son." And I replied, "All right, Alex." I was just a boy and didn't know how to address him. He turned and said, "Did you go to school with me?" I replied no, and then he said, "Well, don't call me Alex, call me Gaffer." His treatment from his teammates wasn't quite as sympathetic, but it was equally as important in helping get over the rash decision he had made. The players, as players will be, the banter was going on, and in a way that's a good thing because it takes it away from everything and helps you move on. But the truth of the matter is there's going to be another game on the Saturday and then there's gonna be another game, and whether that's in the reserve team or the first team, you have to almost think about it like that if you want to continue with a career. I was fortunate to have 5 years at Manchester United. How many kids growing up dream of that and only ever dream of it? So it was definitely a bad moment, a bad night for the club and for me personally, but it wasn't the defining moment, at least not for me. To this day it is a misconception that the York game spelled the end for McGibbon in a United shirt. Sure, the red card didn't do him any favors in proving why he deserved a place in the first team, but he would still go on to gain squad involvements in further games. This was at a time when there were only 3 subs on the bench and it was rarer for wholesale changes to be made in matches. If he was playing in the modern era, it seems certain he would have had further opportunities to get on the pitch instead. I was still working hard, I was still playing quite well in the reserves that particular season. A few months later I was involved in the Newcastle game at Old Trafford, was on the bench for that game. In the end the gaffer put Roy Keane in at centre-back when David May, got injured. Those are the decisions the manager has to make, especially in a huge game like that where they were both even at that stage up at the top end of the league. He was making a decision based on what was best for the club. So it wasn't to say that I was just totally shunned, that wasn't the case at all. I was involved with other games against Everton, Bolton and Chelsea. My final season was actually the most difficult one because I played the pre-season games over here in Ireland and then I was involved in the international tournament with the first team as well. So after that, the gaffer sent me out on loan to Swansea City. I played 1 game before I badly damaged my knee. That was the year where decisions had to be made. McGibbon was sidelined for 5 months, but after returning to fitness he was loaned out to Wigan as he looked to regain match sharpness and self-belief. The spell was so encouraging that it was made permanent in the summer of 1997 as the defender looked to push on with his career and prove he was good enough to play regularly at a top club. McGibbon spent another 5 years at Wigan, helping them reach what is now the Championship, and was also part of the team which beat Millwall at Wembley to win the 1999 Auto Windscreens Shield. He would go on to spend time at Scunthorpe United and Tranmere Rovers, before he decided to move back to Northern Ireland at a time when his father-in-law had developed Alzheimer's disease. McGibbon started a degree in physiotherapy, still playing semi-professionally with Portadown and Glentoran, and even had a spell in management with Lurgan Celtic, Newry City and Portadown. The last decade though has been focused on his charity, Train to be Smart, which was set up in memory of Philip and promotes mental health through sport. McGibbon continues to dedicate his time to the project and does public speaking to raise awareness around mental health to this day. It has proven to be a priceless asset to the local community, with Ferguson and Keane having both helped McGibbon raise awareness and funds for the charity and centre. The thing about football is that it becomes very close. The changing room is quite a guarded place because there is no hiding place. When you meet these people again, they haven't changed very much. So for Roy and the gaffer to actually come over to see the kids at Train to be Smart and obviously promote that side of things is amazing. The gaffer obviously knew of Philip's death. With Roy, he joined the year after Philip's death. So from his point of view, he didn't even know. So for him to listen to me speaking to him on the phone and come over and do it I can't thank him enough. I've no regrets when I look back on my career and I love what I'm able to do now. It is crucial that we get more people talking about how they really feel and educate them around mental health. To play once for Manchester United is not an embarrassment, it is an honour.